Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Hare Krishna Project podcast. This is episode number 121. A big thank you to everyone who tunes in on a regular basis to not listen to me, but to listen to our guest to find out what he or she has to say. Those of you who are avid followers of the Hare Krishna Project podcast will have noticed that this is the first podcast we've produced in 2 weeks. Members of our team, as you know, we don't just produce podcasts, we do events and festivals and book distribution. We went to France for a while because I love France. We went to visit and meet Bhakti Swami, who was traveling around France. So we took time off from producing podcasts in cold England. It's cold again today. And we went onto the boat over to France, which was wonderful. So we're back. So as I say, this is episode number 121. Do not forget, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you haven't already, to hit the subscribe button, so you can be kept updated about future podcasts and video productions from the Hare Krishna Project. Or if you're watching this on Facebook, which is the other way you can watch this podcast, do not forget to like or follow the Hare Krishna Project Facebook page, so you can be kept updated about future podcasts and other things we do here at the Hare Krishna Project. Okay, that's the introduction. Absolutely delighted to welcome our 121st guest this week. Please welcome Chaz.
Thank you for having me. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Chaz. It's great to have you with us. Chaz, we were chatting before I hit the record button. We think we've known of each other's existence for a number of years.
Yes.
Sounds a bit weird, doesn't it? I think with social media, you see someone on Facebook and you become friends on Facebook, but actually you don't engage for like ever. But finally we have engaged with each other, which is great. So it's great to have you on the show. I'm looking forward to this conversation because I don't know a lot about you at all, but I know that there's a lot of things that you're going to share with us that I know our viewers will find very interesting. So let's kick off with the first question. It's a nice, easy one. Please tell us a bit about you and where you are from.
Well, I'm Chaz. I live in Datchet, which is between Windsor and Slough in Berkshire. I was born in Putney in southwest London, and that's where I grew up. We grew up by the River Thames in Putney, which was very beautiful. And then when I was about 9, we moved and we lived by Putney Common, again in Putney, of course, which was even more beautiful. And yeah, that's my parents still live in the same house that I grew up in. I'm going to see them for dinner this evening. And so, yeah, very much from southwest London, but I've now moved slightly further out to Berkshire.
Wow. A proper Londoner then. Would you say you're a proper Londoner, I guess? Your accent seems to have mellowed, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, I do. I do love London. I find it very incredibly draining to go into London now, but that's not to do with London, that's just to do with cities. I found that weirdly during lockdown, I have to phrase this the correct way, but COVID was awful, people being ill and dying was awful, people losing their livelihoods was awful, but very, very specifically lockdown for me, in retrospect, I think worked quite well. I think it came at a time in my life where I was a bit bored of going out all the time. I missed the manor, obviously. I missed specific parts of my life. I was sad that my nieces during that period went from girls needing niece sitting or babysitting to young women who didn't. So I missed that last 18 months of sort of hanging out with them in that unique way of looking after them for a weekend. But I think it suited me. And for about a year after lockdown ended, I wasn't locked down, but I continued to not go out much. And now I've started going out more and trying to push myself a bit because I didn't want to go too weird and too sort of a hermit, sort of end up turning into some sort of fungal form who can't speak. But yeah, I find it quite tiring to go into London in any city, but I am still a Londoner at heart.
Yeah. I agree. I find London and big cities quite overwhelming. I like them in small parts or in kind of bite-sized chunks. So I'm from the countryside. I'm from Somerset. sometimes my accent comes out a bit more. But so I'm used to living in a village where people talk to each other and say good morning when you're going to get the local newspaper and stuff. You go to London or big cities and nobody even makes eye contact. I kind of think, oh, what have I done wrong? You know, that's another thing. Okay. Tell us a bit about your kind of spiritual interests in terms of how did you discover Krishna consciousness or meet the devotees?
Well, we need to go back to when I was 9.
Yes.
And so, having described my childhood, when we made that move from the River Thames to Putney Common, I also changed schools. So previously I'd gone to the local primary state school where I was very happy, reasonably successful. I've read all my old report cards the other day. You know, I think I sounded like a happy, reasonably popular kid who was doing okay at school. And then when I was 9, I ended up moving to a different school, which was in London, in central London more, which was actually run by a religious cult. And so I went from 9 years old, my schooling had been standard state school in London, chatting about Top of the Pops and the FA Cup final or whatever in playtime with my friends. And suddenly I was in this school where we chanted Sanskrit mantras 10 times a day. We meditated twice a day. We read the Gita at least twice a week. You know, this is at the age of 9. And lots of other things going on there as well, which were incredibly strange for me to make that move, and incredibly unsettling.
Can I ask? I don't need to know the name of the school, unless you want to say. But can you tell us the name of the organization that was running the school?
Yes, the School of Economic Science.
Okay.
I think some people will have heard of it. It's not an entirely Vedic organization, but it does very heavily lean on Vedic texts and Vedic practices. It also is got lots of Christianity and lots of other sort of views within it. In as far as its engagement with Hinduism, as I remember it, it was very much from a non-duality angle rather than a bhakti angle.
Yeah. I've heard of it, by the way. So this is my, sorry to use the expression, this is my Bible when it comes to, that's not very clear.
The New Believers.
The New Believers. So yeah. I read it, I've actually just finished reading it again, but I read it 20 years ago whilst at university. My degree is in comparative religion. So the School of Economic Science is in here. Ironically, I first discovered ISKCON by this book as well.
Oh, wow.
Which is also in this book. It's by David Barrett.
Right.
And so, David Barrett's actually a guest I'd love to have on the podcast. But so I've heard of the School of Economic Science. And I did actually read in this book that they did run schools. So you're the first person I've ever met that's attended one of these schools. I realized I kind of cut you off.
That's fine.
Could we could go back to talking about what was happening in the school if you want to.
Yeah, so you know, I walked in on the first day, and the first question I was asked, or my first day, and the first question I was asked was, do you want to meditate? But I was like a 9-year-old who had just grown up in a very standard sort of Putney upbringing. I didn't even know what meditate meant, let alone whether I wanted to do it or not. And this was, I should say straight away, by the way, this was the early 1980s, you know, because I'm ridiculously old. So this was the early 1980s. The school is still running, but as far as I know, it's very much changed and improved since. But so what we got is, on the one hand, we've got all of this stuff. We're chanting Vedic mantras 8 times a day. We're reading the Gita. We're meditating. We're pausing before and after every class, which was like a very brief meditation. But there was also lots of brutality. There was lots of emotional violence, lots of physical violence, you know, from the staff onto the pupils. There ended up being a book coming out exposing all of this called Secret Cult. It was on the front page of newspapers. And then in 2020, they gave just short of £1 million compensation to various former pupils for the abuse that they suffered. I wasn't involved in that action. So it was a sort of an odd time. Now, when we read the Gita, they'd never explained to us sort of what it was or who or what Krishna was. It was not as if we were sitting down and being told, you're going to read, you know, the one time that God has spoken directly to the universe, sort of thing. Or, you know, we weren't being told this was God. We were just reading this book. And so I didn't understand that Krishna was God at the time. All I knew was we read this book, and there were these, and please, if I hope this won't offend anyone, the way I'm speaking now as I saw it as a 9-year-old, I just saw it as a book where there's these two guys talking, and one of them has an answer for everything that gets asked to him or of him, as in Krishna. Every single thing this Arjun, who again I didn't know who he was, asks him, Krishna has an answer. And it frequently involves flipping everything you think on its head. And I liked that. I remembered about the you know, the way he spoke about, you know, not grieving and stuff. And mind-blowing for a 9-year-old who I had no other reference. Most of the kids in the school, when they went home, their parents were members of the School of Economic Science. They had grown up in all of this stuff. I hadn't, and my parents weren't involved. So I went back to my normal life in the evenings and at the weekend, like my friends who like football and Top of the Pops and all the stuff I said. But suddenly I've got in my head, I'm going through this crisis, as in I'm learning all this stuff that's flipping reality on its head. We ate vegetarian food, which, as we'll come to later, is right up my street. And so it was incredibly confusing. But I did there was only 3 things I liked at school, in the secondary school, was running, because I love running. You're in a school run by a religious cult and you enjoy running. Makes sense, really, doesn't it?
It's useful.
Yeah, English, because it's one of the few things I was good at, and Gita. I love the Gita class because I was like, that Arjun guy's going to ask Krishna a question he can't answer this week. And of course he never does. Ask him a question he can't answer, obviously. When I left at 16, sorry, you're going to ask a question.
I was just going to ask a question. Why did you go to this school? I mean, your parents weren't members of the School of Economic Science, were they?
No.
So
it's
why
it's a very good question. It's a combination it's a very good question. I don't have an answer. So the bits of the answer that I have are so sort of boring and specific to my family that they'd involve endless sort of, that they would take the rest of the podcast just to explain little bits. But ultimately, even if I gave all that, my answer would be, I don't know. Since then, more recently, I've sort of wondered whether it was, you know, it wasn't really them who sent me there, whether it was, you know, Krishna who sent me there, or someone like, you know, in the early 1980s in London, what other options were there to get a kid from Putney exposed to Krishna, well, not to Krishna consciousness, because that wasn't really what they were about, but to the Gita and to Vedic practices. I don't know what happened. Something very odd happened. They weren't members, as you said, my parents, they aren't members. They weren't backing it up when I went home. It wasn't as if when I went home, they were saying, yes, this sounds like good stuff, sort of things. It was literally, I mean, I remember when they used to drive me into school quite a lot, like pop music was completely banned in the school, and not just banned in the school, but like you're banned from listening to it at home. But they would drop me off outside the school and I'd have my tape of whatever that week's top 10 are on loud in the car, and I'd get out and I'd step out. And I remember once there was a Frankie Goes to Hollywood song. I'm not going to say which one, but anyone who's heard their song that has quite graphic lyrics. And I'd walk from that, and then I'd walk through the front door and we'd be chanting Sanskrit straight away. So it was a really weird life where I had these two sides, neither of which really tallied with each other. And I really didn't like it. I found it incredibly hard because I can be quite outspoken in life, and I quite like the idea of like forming movements and people protesting together and people standing up together. But practically everyone else in the school came from, you know, from the School of Economic Science, as I said. So therefore, there was no solidarity. When I sat there, like puzzled by all of these teachings and chants, and puzzled by the brutality of the teachers, I couldn't look around and see other kids also baffled. For them, this was normal and expected.
Thank you.
But it
Thank
certainly
you for
wasn't for me.
explaining that. Thank you for explaining that. Just to say before we carry on, so I found the School of Economic Science in the New Believers, and it's in the Eastern Movements in the West section, 2 pages before it's gone.
Wow.
And I did read about it 2
Bit
months
like my
ago.
life.
So that was Chris. Yes. So that was Christian's arrangement that I should read it. But I'm obviously there was a kind of a political link in the past as well. But I shall reread this, I think, over the next few days. So I have a general interest in kind of new religious movements and sects and cults, and my degrees in comparative religion. So I'm just fascinated that you went to a school run by the School of Economic Science. Possibly more fascinating, I find, than anything else we might talk about. Not the other stuff we're going to talk about. It's more interesting.
No, it is interesting, and it influences everything in its own way. Even though I didn't like it, I can credit it for so many good things that have happened in my life. So yeah.
So you mentioned, I think you talked before I kind of cut in. Sorry about that. You mentioned about being 16 or turning 16 or something. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so when I was 16, I begged to leave the school more or less from the week I joined, but I didn't, and I joined at 9, but I didn't leave until I was 16. It was a great day. I felt like, the Guildford Four when I walked out of that front door. And so I left. Now, what I did at that point was, although I'd loved the Gita and I'd loved the vegetarian aspect of the school and some of the other aspects of it, I rejected everything. I threw the baby out with the bathwater. I was so ecstatic and almost ecstatically defiant or defiantly ecstatic to leave, that everything went. I became I became one of those people that couldn't see anything good in religion in general, let alone, in the Gita and all this. I was just, I'm finally out of this place that's made my life misery for 6 or more years, and I'm just happy to leave, and I'm rejecting the whole thing. And that might have been that. So now I finally get close to answering your question directly of how I got to meet devotees. So in 2015, so I left in 1989, so it took till 2015, a long time. My dear sister-in-law was passing away with cancer, and it was tragic. 3 young daughters. Obviously, watching my brother become, a widow in front of me and all of this sort of stuff. And suddenly various things happened. There was a weird day where Ganesha suddenly made himself very much known to me, where every time, it's going to sound weird, but hopefully you've probably had, we all like weird stories, I hope, but just one day, everywhere I turned, there was Ganesha. So I got on the train to go and see my sister, who was in her last days by this point. And on the train, there were 2 people talking about Ganesha. Nothing odd about that. Then I changed trains. And as I was changing trains, I saw 2 different people with Ganesha t-shirts on. I should say there was no festival or anything going on. This was pure coincidence. I got out of the train at Tooting Bec, and I saw some Ganesha, someone had done a Ganesha graffiti outside the tube. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of Ganesha today. So I was passing this shop called Little India, which is on Tooting High Street. And I went in and I bought a little Ganesha. And then I walked along, and I walked past a shop, and there was a Ganesha song playing as I walked past. Then I got to my sister-in-law and brother's house, and they said, look, I said, what can I do to help? Because obviously in this crisis, they said, can you help the girls with their homework? I said, yeah, sure. So I went through. May, one of my nieces, May, what's your homework about today? She said, oh, it's about Ganesha. And I'm like, okay, this is really weird. And I've always sort of believed in looking for signs and stuff. So I remember I bought a Ganesha sort of pendant and started to read what I could about Ganesha. Now, about a week after that, this then rekindled my interest, and it broke down the obstacles. Literally, I've never thought of it that way, but it broke down the obstacles for me to return to the good stuff that I'd learned at school, as in the Gita predominantly. So I went to a Waterstones and I bought a penguin edition of the Gita, because what I'd remembered was what Ganesha appearing had reminded me of was that Krishna had this very, to me, unique take on grief. And I couldn't remember what it was, but I thought I want to go and read it, because I remember at school thinking, wow, that turns everything I would have thought about life on its head. So I went and bought this Gita Penguin edition from a Waterstones. Now, about a week later, I was in a local shop in our village in Datchet, and the lady, the Indian lady, like behind the counter, said, "Oh, you've got a Ganesha pendant on." And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, you know, that's interesting. Why is that?" And so I explained, luckily not as at much length as I'm doing now, because that would have been more than she had bargained for. But I explained that that I had this background with the Gita and that I'd read it. And she straight away said, "What edition are you reading?" And I said, "Oh, I think it's Penguin or something." She said, "No, no, 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 no. You've got to read Bhagavad Gita as it is." And I said, "Oh, okay. I haven't heard of that." I said, and she said, "Yeah, it comes from," she said, "you can go up to this very special temple. It's near Watford." And she said, "You can get one there." She said, "George Harrison from the Beatles bought it for the movie." And I was like, straight away, I am going there, because she was just, "You have to buy this edition. Don't read that other edition." Yeah. And to be clear, just to say, she's not even ISKCON, but it's so revered. His, Prabhupada's version is so revered, far beyond ISKCON, as we know. And so I went up there, and then I think a few days later, I then went to a seminar or a class or something upstairs at the Soho Temple. And I was just away by that point. But it's odd where this is even weirder than the Ganesha story. But I remember when I turned up to the Soho Temple, I had lots of mixed feelings, because on the one hand, I was very excited, and I felt a pull from it all. But on the other hand, I had my doubts from school. And so I remember turning up and having almost this defensiveness inside me of, if anyone tries to ask me for my bank details and tries to corner me and demand my bank details so I can do a standing order or anything, they'll have another thing coming if they try that on me. And then I walked through the front door, and there were these two beautiful, beautiful devotees. And they both sort of, "Hare Krishna." And I said, "Oh, I'm here for this seminar," which was upstairs. And they told me, one of them took me up and all that. Now, when you've been going around ISKCON things as long as I have, and certainly as long as you have, which I'm sure is longer, you start to see the same faces, and you get to know faces, if not the actual people, you get to know the faces. I've never, ever seen these guys since. In my mind's eye, in my memory, I think they were Gaura Nitai. Because I didn't know of Gaura Nitai. I didn't know, but they were literally like a poster. They had that much beauty and effulgence, and that much together, like the perfect pair, like nothing, like they just look perfect together. And I often wonder, I thought, who or what was it who welcomed me that day? It's probably wishful thinking on my part, when I think it might have been more than just two very healthy devotees. But
angels had appeared. The Hare Krishna version of angels have appeared to welcome you to the temple, and you've never seen them since.
And they didn't even ask me for my bank details.
Fascinating. I love that. I love that the story of the lady in the shop in the village that you live in, and her recommending Bhagavad Gita as it is. And I just love that. Everyone's got a story, and that's certainly your very unique story. So that was so you did go to Bhakti Vedanta Manor and then to Soho Street. How not how quickly, but how soon after the recommendation from the lady in the corner shop did you go to Bhakti Vedanta Manor?
Oh, I ordered the edition from the Bhakti Vedanta Manor website as I stood in her shop. She said, "Are you going to buy it?" And I showed her the confirmation, well, not the dispatch email, but the order confirmation email. I said, "I've just done it." And I remember it came, even though this was 5 p.m. on a Friday, it came in the next day's post, which I remember thinking, wow. And I think I went probably the following week or something. But I've left one bit out, which is quite pivotal actually from the school, and it's sort of possibly semi-amusing, is that when I was about, I don't know, maybe 13 or 14, so I'd been there a couple of years, and I had this sort of rebellious thing. I should say, part of the reason why, I mentioned about the compensation and stuff, part of the reason why I didn't get involved with that was for two reasons. Number one was that I was haunted quite literally by an image of an elderly wife upstairs, and a bang on the door, and someone saying, "Oh, we're here because of something your husband did 30 years ago or something." And I couldn't, it hurt me so much to think that elderly people would get a knock on the door and would be told that they'd done something wrong and that they were in some form of trouble. To me, that happening doesn't help me one bit. In fact, the opposite. It would hurt me to do that. And I'm not always the most forgiving person. I wish I was, but I'm not always. But in this case, I just thought, I can't bear the thought of elderly people having a knock on the door one day and saying there's a legal, whether it's a criminal or a compensatory issue with something you did 30 years ago, when you had not a clue that what you were doing was wrong. I never once got a vibe off any of the teachers there that they knew what they were doing was wrong. They were just, it was a weird place. But so I was about 13 or 14 there one day, and the head teacher in assembly one day said, "Oh, tomorrow night we're going to a big hall in Kensington, and a very special man is going to come and talk to you." And I thought, this sounds like it's going to be the most boring evening of my existence. You know, again, I'm a 13 or 14-year-old at this point. So I, and there's no way to soft soak this. I went and bought some, we lived next door to a hippie, and I went and bought some magic mushrooms off him. And I thought, oh, I'd never done them before. And I thought, I'll go and get some, and maybe they'll get me through this really long talk, because it said it was going to be a long talk. So we're on the bus on the way over there, and all the other kids are being good, wholesome, well-behaved kids. I'm these magic mushrooms, and they kicked in as this incredible human being from India wandered onto the stage in robes and stuff. The happiest, most beautiful human being I'd ever seen in my life at that point. He was called Dada Swami, and I don't know a lot about him or his what his sort of, you know, movement or area of it all was, but he came on and he giggled and he laughed as he spoke, and he was joyful, and he was effulgent, to use a bit of ISKCON terminology. Let's start bringing it in, non-different effulgent. And he was wonderful. And then after about an hour and a half of him talking, where we were crying with laughter with him, not at him, with him, at his joy, and he had tears in his eyes of joy as he spoke to us. He couldn't believe he'd come to London and found a school that read Gita and chanted Sanskrit mantras while they meditated. This was very odd, because I should, in case it's not clear, say practically everyone was not of Indian background in the school. Anyway, as he said, I was starting to feel a bit good by this point, because A, he's Jewish, and B, let's remember my little pre-event snack. And just as he started to chant, he said, "I want you to chant with me." And it was the Maha Mantra. Bang, they kicked in completely. So suddenly, for about 45 minutes, I'm got this double bliss going on of the Maha Mantra, which I'd obviously never heard before, and these psychedelics that I've eaten. I should say I don't do anything like that anymore. I should say, in case any of my employers are watching. And I literally, I barely even drink coffee anymore. But and I was just in absolute joy, literally in heaven. And it wasn't the normal Maha Mantra, it was a modified version. So it's still in my head from that day 40 years ago. It was Hare Krishna, Hare Ram, Dada Swam, Dada Swam. And we sang that for 45 minutes or an hour. And definitely something happened in my head or my soul or my mind. Something flipped in me that night where, you know, let's just be clear about it. Let's sort of zoom out again. It's very odd. Nobody who I went to primary school with were doing that at their secondary school. You know, chanting Vedic, the Maha Mantra for an hour with an Indian Swami, while, to be blunt, ripped off their tits on magic mushrooms. I mean, it was, so I think we'll go back to 2015 now, but I think that was, that meant that when I went into the manor and when I went into the Soho temple and started chanting, it was not odd for me at all, because I'd had this ecstatic and psychedelic experience on it as a kid. But the other things that happened around that time were, you know, the sort of saying, the numbers vary, but people say, you know, you take one step towards Krishna and he'll take 1,000 steps towards you, or 100, whatever. Like, the thing is, I very much had that at the time. So the lady in the shop in the village, that was one. I was discussing something to do with football on Twitter once with someone, and then he said, he looked at my Twitter profile picture, which was me at a, I think it was a Muji Bhajan I'd been to, and it's me sort of dancing around, desperately trying to look like Mahaprabhu. And and he said, "Oh, you like Kirtan?" He said, "You have to come over to our temple in Feltham, which is very near me." He said, "We have a Narsingadev temple in Feltham." He said, "We'd like you to come over." So I went over, and I went there a bit. It wasn't ISKCON, it was another organization which I'm not part of, but it was amazing to meet them and to see this huge Narsingadev Murti, like that people have actually run out of the temple when the curtains have opened before. It's such a, he's such a magnificent Murti. And then an old friend who I hadn't seen since I was like 13, as we were saying earlier about Facebook, he added me on Facebook. I was like, wow. And that day I'd been thinking, I want to learn Bansuri. And then suddenly I get this Facebook ad friend request from this guy who I haven't seen since I was 13. And he's like he's become a globally celebrated Bansuri player. So suddenly I need to find someone to ask about Bansuri. Suddenly my old school friend turns up and says, yes, I can answer questions about Bansuri. So there was lots of stuff like that going on at that time. It just felt like even in the next close along, I never knew, but there was like a Hindu monk from Vrindavan who lived there. And all these years, and I'm always out wandering around the village with the dog, or running or walking or anything, and I'd never seen him. And suddenly I mean, if I'd lived in Vrindavan, I couldn't have been more surrounded by Krishna, but I was in Datchet.
I love it. I just love that, how kind of all these things kind of piece together, and all these things that I mean, they're not really coincidences. A Christian friend of mine calls them God incidences instead of coincidences. These things that are arranged by Krishna or by God just happen. You know, it's not a coincidence. There's a Hindu monk living in Datchet, in of all places, and you know, it's a fantastic story. You've kind of answered this next question already. I think it's kind of come out, but in terms of your education and your upbringing, how has that affected you in your adult life? And has your schooling impacted your views on religion and or spirituality? I think you've kind of touched on that a bit, but if you could maybe talk about it a bit more, that'd be great.
Well, for several decades, you know, between leaving school at 16 and then 2015, its influence was really to turn me into not for all of that time, but for about half of that time, to turn me into quite an angry, you know, atheist. Because I'd had this bad experience. But that was only surface. When I look at it, what was I doing in my spare time when I was at that school? Was I still going to football and talking about Top of the Pops? No, I wasn't. I was doing animal rights campaigning. I was doing anti-nuclear campaigning. And then after I left the school, straight after I mentioned them earlier, I was involved with the Birmingham 6 campaign and other miscarriage of justice campaigns, because having felt trapped in that school and misunderstood in that school and all that, when I read about wrongly incarcerated prisoners, I had a very natural response to that. So therefore, it was actually influencing me in all sorts of good ways. Certainly the animal stuff, to have been reading Gita, to have been eating vegetarian food every day at school, that must have influenced that. It certainly made it much easier for me as a kid to go vegetarian, because there was no issue at school, because we ate vegetarian food every day. What I think in terms of my upbringing, my grandmother on my father's side was I think a big influence, because she was a very joyful person. Now, when I went down to stay with her when I was a kid all the time in Kent, I would on Sundays she'd say, "Oh, we're off to church," and so we'd go off to church, and there'd be lots of the sort of people whose attitude to church and God and religion are the sort of people who would have put me off. Like, it was felt at times more like a sort of a get together of Daily Telegraph subscribers than anyone there to sort of connect with the divine. Apart from my grandmother and maybe one or two others, but she was joyful, and the way she sung was joyful, and she fulgent, we'll use the word again, but she was like that. She walked in there as a force of nature, and that was her connection with it. And I think if I'd have not experienced that, I think I either wouldn't have felt the same about religion and spirituality, or I would have ended up not a Daily Telegraph subscriber, but I would have ended up having that relationship with it. She showed me that even in a church in Saltwood near Hythe in Kent, that you can go in and you can almost, she was almost doing a bit of Sankirtan. Do you know what I mean? Like, her voice was beautiful, but it would be loud and joyful. And while everyone else was singing very much like Christians do, hers was the joy in the place, the life.
Was this a Church of England, out of interest?
Yes.
Anglican church. I guess that when you mentioned Daily Telegraph, I guess that there was a joke. I don't want to come off the fence too much, but there was a joke many years ago that the Anglican Church, the Church of England, was the Tory party at prayer. I think the Anglican Church in my village is actually quite mixed now in different ways, but historically, the middle classes went to the Anglican Church. And the working classes went to the Methodist Church, certainly in the kind of where I'm from. And obviously political allegiances were different based on the church that you went to and, you know, your income and everything. So I guessed it was an Anglican church. Okay. So that was your father's mother. You used to go to church with your father's mother. And in terms of your parents, who are still with us, I think you said,
yeah.
Do they have any kind of religious inclination or spiritual inclination at all?
I'd say not enough to have made a difference either way.
Yeah,
it was not a push towards or a pull away. It was not not enough of that either way, I wouldn't say. I think my dad's where me and him are similar in all of this is when I tell kooky stories like Ganesha following me around tooting or Goinatai welcoming me to, he laps all that up. He's like me. If somebody tells me a story like that, there's no part of me that's like, sounded a bit odd and improbable. I'm like, yeah, tell me another one. I get all this. When I read the old stories about, you know, Prabhupada and, like, you know, his amazing, like, how he'd know what was going to happen and he could make things, you know, this force of nature that he was, or beyond that. I don't, sometimes I tell people these stories and they're like, but what do you make of that? I go, oh, I think it's brilliant. They go, yeah, but do you think, I said, well, obviously it's true. Like, because I don't doubt any of this stuff. So I think, and my dad's like that, and his actual birth mother, who is not the lady I went to the church with in Kent, his birth mother was quite into mystical stuff as well. I think tarot and stuff. So I think there's a certain amount coming from his side, I guess, from there.
Great. Okay. And I think you've also mentioned in terms of that, you know, spending time at a school run by the School of Economic Science, it also kind of encouraged you to be vegetarian, which we'll talk about a bit more in a minute. And you developed a love or an interest in devotion to Krishna. So these things are in your adult life now after all of these years. And no, you don't look your age, which is a compliment. I was a bit surprised when you said that you were 13 in 19. No, you were 9 in 1981.
Well, I'm 50 now. That saves anyone doing the maths. Yeah.
So can we talk a bit now about your kind of campaign work? Because one of the things, so I've been following you on Twitter for years. So just so our viewers are aware, one of the things that made me aware of Chaz was he was one of the first to review my book a number of years ago, and then I kind of looked him up online. Who is this guy reviewing my book? And you're a well-known kind of animal rights campaigner, and you have been for some time, particularly in linked with the dairy industry. Tell us a bit about that. Why is it important to you, and why do you do it?
Well, it started when I was about 11 or 12, and I learned about vivisection, about animal experimentation. And that horrified, and and continues to horrify me. So that's the starting point. In terms of dairy, I mean, I've always had a love of cows. I remember when I was a kid, we used to sometimes go down to see a friend of the family who lived in Cornwall, and his home was surrounded by cows and fields, and I would just be standing there sort of wandering around, and where everyone else would be like, oh, it smells. To me, that was the most lovely smell in the world, with the smell of cows and all that comes with it, like, because I just loved seeing them. And then we used to go up every Saturday to the toy shop, and I was allowed to choose, when we were back in London, I was allowed to choose another little plastic animal from my farm, and my mum had to shout at me once, you can't have another cow, you've got to get a pig or a sheep. So I think I got a pig next. But so I went vegetarian as a kid. As I said, when I was 16, I then rejected everything. So that was part of what got rejected with it. Then I went back to vegetarianism in 2015. Now, when I started speaking on social media about the fact that I'd gone vegetarian, people who I knew who were vegan would write to me, and they would say, listen, it's great that you've gone vegetarian, but they said, we also know that cows are your favorite animals. So how come you say that, you love cows and you don't believe in cows being slaughtered, but you buy cheese and milk and chocolate, dairy, which is responsible for the slaughter? All dairy cows and dairy farms get slaughtered and mistreated. So they said, but I'll be honest, at first I was like so many other people, I can't live without paneer, I can't live without halloumi, I can't live without all of these things. So I just ignored it. And then the moment I started looking into dairy farming, because I was writing about animal rights by this point for the national newspapers, I regularly write kind of hard-hitting articles for The Guardian and The Independent and places. Once I started investigating dairy, I realized very quickly that this was by far the cruelest form of farming that there is. And, I've watched all of the videos, I've read all the testimonies, I've seen hundreds of hours of footage from farms and slaughterhouses and laboratories and fur farms, and because I write about this, so I've had to watch that, and it's burned into my eyes and into my soul to watch firsthand this suffering. And the worst form of animal abuse, in my opinion, is vivisection in laboratories. It's absolutely hideous. But in terms of farming, you've got like meat farming, egg farming all around here. Dairy farming, it's horrifically cruel what they do. It's by far the cruelest. So then I instantly went vegan, and instantly took that up as my key writing cause, because of the cruelty, and because cows are my favorite animals. So I couldn't bear to I couldn't bear to stay silent, basically. And I even remember once in the manor, as I don't normally pray in that sort of slightly more Western way of, oh, please God, give me, I don't normally do that. But just that day, I just remember being full of emotion and just bowing down in front of Krishna and in the manor, and just saying, please, please make it that I can speak on this in as widespread way as I can. So I'll tell a quick story about this. I wrote a piece for The Guardian in 2017, basically over 800 words, explaining everything that happens on dairy farms. And I had the most remarkable week of my life when that went live. The dairy industry absolutely lost their rag at me, would be a polite way of putting it. And, bombarded with tweets, abuse, some threats, from dairy farmers and from dairy bosses and stuff. Absolutely livid that, because this was really the moment where it burst through into the mainstream media. I should say 2 days earlier, the Daily Mail had done a big expose of a dairy farm in England, and they'd got some very harrowing photos. So this was turning into a bad week for the dairy industry. And because my Guardian article, if anyone wants to see it, just Google Dairy a Scary Guardian. I've written all my life, and I'll probably write for the rest of my life. I'm at peace with the fact I might never write another piece that means as much to me as that, because the language in it when I read it back, I'm like, yes, that's how angry I am. That's how awful it is. I've not pulled a punch and I've not exaggerated. I've completely managed to nail how awful this industry is. But another nice thing did come from it, as well as all of the abuse, which was not nice, was that a sanctuary down in Kent, in Ashford, named a calf after me. So what happened was they got a calf from a dairy farmer, rang them up, and they said, we've got a blind calf. Now, if a calf is blind, that quite often might mean that they've got a certain disease within them, which means that their meat can't be eaten. Because it was a male calf, and all male calves are normally just shot when they're born on dairy farms. But this one would sell male calves for veal. So as the mother has babies, if it's a female baby, they're put into the dairy production line where they're forcibly impregnated and their babies are stolen from them the moment they're born. And the mother and the baby, well, the mother in particular, scream for days with horror at this. That's standard practice on dairy farms. The male calves on this farm would be sold to a veal farm. So they'd have a stay of execution of about a year and they'd be killed. This one couldn't do that because there was a question over his meat, his flesh, because he was blind. So they rung up this sanctuary that I know in Ashford, and they said, right, we're going to have to kill him, or, you know, we don't have or you're going to have to take him. So they said, well, we'll take him. And because I'd just written this article about dairy, which had gone beyond viral, they said, oh, we're going to name this calf Chaz. And the final happiest part of the story is, once all his papers were signed and he officially belonged to the sanctuary, his eyesight came back.
Wow, that's amazing.
So he now lives in Herne Bay in another sanctuary. He's no longer a calf. He is enormous. As anyone who's been to see the oxen at Bhakti Vedanta Manor will know, male cows get incredibly big sometimes. And he's just living his best life on a sanctuary with his eyesight. Whereas if he hadn't had that stroke of luck of losing his eyesight temporarily, he would have been long gone.
That's an amazing story. I cannot believe that he regained or got his eyesight back when he left. That's fantastic. So share a bit more about your enthusiasm for what you do. So you've written articles against dairy farming. Do you go on protests and marches and demonstrations, and do you do things like that?
Yeah, I do. I go on. So I do a certain amount of leafleting. There's a place in Peterborough, near Peterborough, called MBR Acres, and what they do there is they breed beagles to sell to laboratories, and so they're known as the MBR beagles. So I do a fair amount we do leafleting sort of sessions about that, just to bring that to sort of people's attention, because what you'll find is issues like meat and dairy, there's the double-ended thing where it puts a lot of people's backs up, because when you're telling them about it, they're thinking, oh, hang on, if they're a meat eater, say, and you're telling them about what happens to animals in slaughterhouses, you can see they'll be like, oh, but I'm someone who's involved with this. Whereas when you're talking about dogs being bred to be put through toxicology tests, most people think, okay, they're completely opposed to that and they have no defense mechanism against it. Yeah, I go on an annual march, but this kind of does bring it back into, you know, the main sort of topic. On last year's, every August there's a thing called the National Animal Rights March, and I always go, and I normally dress up as an animal. I was a cow one year, I was a beagle last year. But I noticed that some devotees from Soho Temple had brought along a cart with prashadam on it, little bags of, you know, nuts and raisins and stuff like you'd get, like they would on a Ratha Yatra procession, and they were offering these to people, which was lovely. And then at the rally, which was in Parliament Square, there was a bit of a clash between some of the vegan protesters and the devotees. Well, the devotees weren't clashing, but they were sort of surrounded by some vegan protesters who were asking how people who venerate the cow can nevertheless buy dairy from dairy farms that, you know, rape and abuse and kill cows on an industrial scale. Now, to be clear, the prasadam the devotees had kindly brought along was not dairy prasadam. This was just that these people had this knowledge that there was this, whether you call it a contradiction, whatever it is, this sort of interesting dynamic going on. And it was like watching my mum and dad, not my mum and dad, but like watching a mum and dad row, as in my dear fellow animal rights protesters and my dear fellow devotees arguing in the street. It was heartbreaking for me because, you know, two groups of people who meant so much to me arguing was not the sight I wanted to see.
So can we talk a bit about, so you're a vegan, you've been a vegan for a while, a long time, and you're also interested in Krishna consciousness. You attend ISKCON events, ISKCON temples. Of course, ISKCON isn't officially a vegan organization.
That's right. Yeah.
So Hare Krishna devotees or Gaudiya Vaishnava devotees will take milk. What is your approach to that, or your thought on that, or how have you kind of emotionally dealt with that in your head?
I don't have any myself. Obviously, like being vegan. What I've noticed is you know, I try and sort of stay just positive and sort of constructive on it. Yes, if a vegan is standing there, a vegan protester, and is shouting at them, how can you venerate the cow and pay people who kill them? You know, and who mistreat them, and who, you know, kill male calves on the day of birth and chuck their bodies in a bin at the end of the farm. You know, how can you sort of do that? I understand that I understand their bafflement on that. But equally, if you really are going to say, of all the people in the world to have a go at, which is what they were doing, to have a go at about their relationship with animals, why would you be? ISKCON would. What I would say to them is, I say, right, when we've stopped vivisection, when we've stopped meat farming, when we've stopped fur farming, when we've stopped fox hunting, when we've stopped all of these things, and the only thing left in the whole world that we don't like about animals is Hare Krishna people buying milk from conventional, I will join with you then, and I will shout too.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I think that if you know, that I don't know. It's not an argument I want to get involved with, which is strange, and does get me certain confusement among some fellow vegans, because they're like, but you're so outspoken about all of this. Why do you pull your punches there? And I just say, because I just think that there were much, I was going to say fish to fry, but that would be the wrong term. But there's so many more battles to be fought, and like I said, if we reach a point where that's the last battle to be fought, then I will fight it. But,
so you've got 2 feet, like most of us, and you've got 1 foot firmly in the kind of vegan camp, you know, vegan campaigning against animal cruelty, in favor of animal welfare, but you've also got this foot in the kind of Vaishnav spiritual camp. You get involved with ISKCON initiatives, and that foot is kind of in a different position from that foot, because in that foot they do take milk and other things from cows, milk, cheese, butter, and also honey. Honey is a really interesting one, isn't it? So you know, I'm not a vegan. I'd like to be a vegan. I like the idea of it, but I'm not a vegan. And I remember 10 years ago being in a vegan restaurant having something to eat, and I stupidly asked them if they had any honey. I mean, I've never asked anyone that anyway. I mean, why on this particular day that I asked for honey? I think I was having something like ice cream or honey, anyway, or ice cream or cheesecake. And the guy got really kind of annoyed with me. Of course, we're not going to have honey. Of course, and I literally for a few minutes I didn't know why he was getting so angry. And obviously, I then realized that honey is from bees. I mean, I know that, but in my head, I was thinking about animal cruelty, and you're a vegan because you're against animal cruelty. And I was thinking, well, is it cruel to take honey from bees? And I hadn't really thought of that. So you've got this foot over here in the kind of ISKCON Hare Krishna camp. So we can have honey, we can have milk, we can have cheese, we can have paneer, we can have butter, you know, and a lot of people would say, well, there's kind of a conflict. Certainly this foot over here, the vegan, the kind of die-hard, radical, revolutionary vegans would say there's this kind of conflict. But you were saying to me, or we were chatting before I hit the record button, that there is a growing tendency towards veganism, isn't there, in the kind of ISKCON community? Tell us a bit about that. Is it growing? Is it big? Is it vocal?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say first off, I've never met anyone in ISKCON who is anti-vegan. I've not met many who are vegan, but although a growing number are, but I've never met anyone who's actually anti-vegan, even though dairy, not just in terms of eating, but in terms of puja and stuff, ghee and stuff, is a big part of the tradition. I've never met anyone who's had any hostility towards veganism or towards me being vegan. That's just not the vibe, obviously, that there is. I think that when I first got involved with ISKCON in 2015, I'd just gone vegetarian, but I wasn't vegan for the first year and a half that I was going to temples and stuff. So, but once I did, I remember once asking at the manor when I was getting some prashadam, just asking, in a very nice way, so like, do you know if one of the particular bits had dairy in it? And, it was just a thing that was very baffling at that time. It's like, why are people asking things like that, even though they were absolutely lovely and as helpful as they sort of could be, obviously. Whereas now I notice that, events at the manor and events at events related to ISKCON, particularly among the younger members of the thing, that vegan food is quite often quite standard, or at the very least there will be plenty there for a vegan to eat if they don't want to be eating the. And then there was this whole period where there was a confusion whereby it was not always understood that if something is 100% vegan but is cooked in ghee, that then means it's no longer vegan. That was another period where I think there was an adjustment that went on. But I've never felt any hostility towards vegan, and I think that a lot of people just didn't know until recently how dairy farming happened. And I can't be critical of that, because neither did I until, I mean, admittedly, I did quite a while ago, and I've spent years writing about it. But what I mean is, there was a point at which I was a vegetarian who's self-defined as a friend of the animals, most of all a friend of the cows. And my standard dinner would be paneer halloumi, or in an ideal world, absolutely both of them for dinner. And so I think that it's but having said that, it's not a thing that's just going to evolve, as in it's not a thing that a younger generation of devotees are going to come through and it's going to become a vegan movement, because it's too embedded, dairy, in rituals as well as eating and in philosophy. It's not.
Well, I mean, I'm happy in a minute to kind of give a go at giving the official answer from the Hare Krishna movement on diet, but it's very much embedded theologically. I mean, Krishna, who is God, we recognize as God, in the spiritual world and also in the physical world. When he was here 5,000 years ago, he was and is a cowherd boy. Yeah. He milked the cows and looked after the cows. Like in the Christian tradition, Jesus was a carpenter, and in the Gaudiya Vaishnav and wider Hindu tradition, Krishna is a cowherd boy. So if God is taking milk, why shouldn't we? So you're absolutely right. Literally, theologically, Krishna, God, is a cowherd boy. So just to, I'm going to give a go kind of talking a bit about diet, because some of the listeners, I know we've got a wide variety of listeners listening to this podcast that be members of the vegan movement and also members of the Hare Krishna movement, and some are in both camps, which is great. Sometimes it's good to sit on the fence, I find, and kind of see what the different options are. But actually in the Gaudiya Vaishnav or Vaishnav tradition or Hare Krishna tradition, we would follow a pure veg diet. So it's not vegetarian, it's not vegan, it's halfway in the middle. I was explaining to someone the other day, terms of the diet that I follow, you could call it pure vegetarianism, or even another way to explain it is Asian vegetarianism, which is different from Western vegetarianism. So in Western vegetarianism, eggs unfortunately are accepted because they're not meat. But in pure vegetarianism, we don't take eggs. So no meat, fish, or eggs. Eggs, because eggs are from an unclean part of an animal, and also the eggs have the potential to become meat. And also according to the the Vedas, there's lots of theological and philosophical discussions about when a life becomes a life, or when certainly in a human body, when the soul enters the womb, it's at the time of the egg, the very beginning of that period. So we don't take eggs, but we do take milk, or have or consume milk, cheese, things that would come from a cow or even a goat, that, well, the official view is where no harm has come to the animal. Of course, there's a major issue here with how milk is taken from cows, as you've already talked about. So there's that from a kind of material point of view. But also there's a spiritual element to it, is that in the Hare Krishna tradition or the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, we will offer, before we eat or take food, we offer it to Krishna, therefore it becomes prasadam. So prasadam literally means the Lord's mercy. So Krishna, it's taught theologically and in sastra or scripture that Krishna takes the karma away. I often joke that unfortunately it's not calorie free, just karma free. So Krishna, it'd be great if it was calorie free. Wow, it'd be the biggest food industry in the world. So Krishna takes the karma away. So if you think about it, if we're having some rice, a bowl of rice, lots of people have come into contact with that rice since it was taken from the land. The people that picked the rice, the people that packed the rice, the people that put it on a lorry, that drove the rice, or that stacked the rice on the shelves in Tesco or Sainsbury's or your local shop in Datchet. Lots of people have come into contact with those foodstuffs. So before we eat or consume or take the food, we offer it to God or Krishna, and it becomes prasadam. And I was just looking on my phone just now, not being rude. I was just looking up the verse from the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 9:26 that the food items that can be offered to him, the things that he will accept. And Krishna says, offer me with love and devotion a leaf, a flower, a fruit, or water, and I will accept it. So Krishna doesn't accept meat. Krishna doesn't accept eggs, which is why we won't take them. In one sense, we are literalists, scriptural literalists. We will follow what it says in sastra or scripture. So that's the kind of official view. There are some sannyasis, though, or gurus in the Hare Krishna movement that are moving towards veganism. Or they will only take milk or have milk if they know it's from a cow that is protected.
Yes.
So the cows at Bhakti Vedanta Manor are allowed, thankfully, to live a full life, and they can die naturally.
Yeah.
They aren't killed or abused. They are allowed to live a wonderful life, running around the fields, and they are looked after. So there are a growing number of leaders within the Hare Krishna movement that are vegan or are allowing their disciples to be vegan. But it's not the official view of the Hare Krishna movement or ISKCON, and it probably, I would say, never will be. Sorry to be kind of to upset people, because literally the theological position or the status of Krishna or God is that he is a cowherd boy. He looks after the cows. And finally, just to say, before I come back to you, I have met people in ISKCON who are anti-vegan. There, believe it or not, there are very few of them. I mean, I wouldn't say it's a fanaticism. It's just this strong connection with this theological view that actually we are instructed or we're allowed to take milk. So therefore, you should. I mean, there are some people in ISKCON like that. I mean, they might not say it to you to your face, but they do exist. So I think I've explained the official Hare Krishna movement view. There are also some, so the Hare Krishna movement is quite broad. There are some groups that also won't eat certain types of vegetables based on where the vegetable comes from, but I don't know much about that, and I've not really specialized in looking into that. So that's the official kind of ISKCON view. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, but if you read that, could you read that? I know the verse
Yeah,
in the
it's
Gita very well, but if you read it again,
yeah,
um,
it's Bhagavad Gita 9:26. So Krishna says, offer me with love and devotion a leaf, a flute, sorry, a leaf, a flower, Freudian slip. I'm always thinking of Krishna. Offer me with love and devotion a leaf, a flower, a fruit, or water. I will accept it.
so you pointed out correctly there that what's not there is meat. What would you say, and this is not me asking because I'm perfectly at peace with everything, but for the sake of the conversation, did you notice what else wasn't on that list?
Milk's not on the list.
Yeah. But there's no doubt about dairies and milk's core part in the whole tradition. It's not up to me as a vegan to come in from outside, to choose to come in to a belief system that originally came from a different continent to me, and for me
Yes.
to walk in and then start wagging my finger. I'm just not, I'm not interested in that. And so but I did think that that was worth pointing out. You said like we don't therefore offer meat because it's not on the list. But that's and Prabhupada often said about how it helps the more subtle brain fibers in the brain to drink milk. And in fact, I was at the Manor the other day. It was quite nice. I was on Hanuman appearance day, and somebody was recounting how Prabhupada, how these sort of paintings of Hanuman, sort of sometimes he becomes almost like this ripped bodybuilder, and you think, I know what they're trying to do. It's a sort of superhero vibe, but you sometimes think we don't need to make out he was, the sort of big muscle man. It was like part of the joy of the Hanuman story is that it was the monkey who was strong beyond his physicality. But what Prabhupada said was he saw one of these paintings of Hanuman as a big ripped bodybuilder, and he said, no, he's look at him there, he's meat beautiful, we're milk beautiful, which I thought was nice. And the bottom line, where I think we can all agree, even possibly the people who you mentioned a moment ago, is that any ISKCON devotee who does have dairy, who was literally offered like that a ahimsa paneer or ghee or milk or whatever it is, and a mainstream one, I think we know which one they would pick. And they would pick the ahimsa one every time. Unfortunately, it's not a viable thing. We're never going to be able to produce ahimsa milk on a widespread scale. But like I said, it's one battle within the animal sphere that I don't wish to get involved in. I feel very at peace with what my position is,
and unfortunately things just take time. I mean, in one sense we have time. It's 427,000 years left of the Kali Yuga, and we might want things instantly. I remember a talk that David Attenborough gave, must have been 2 years ago. I mean, David Attenborough's like, not just a national treasure, but he's like up there, isn't he, in terms of like, everyone respects David Attenborough. And he gave a talk about 2 years ago where he said he is of the view that within 60 to 70 years time, most of the world, or a lot of the world, would have become vegetarian, because just the way that we are kind of having these slaughterhouses and these kind of the mass slaughtering of animals just actually won't be good for the environment. I mean, he saw it from a different point of view. We just won't do it on the scale that we do it now, just kind of killing animals and transporting them around the world, because it just won't be good for the environment. It won't be good. And society would have gone kind of almost full circle. And actually in 60 or 70 or 80 years time, people will be having more of a plant-based diet, or growing things in their gardens like they used to do during the war and after the war. So we might just have to wait a bit. Maybe you and I can meet in 50 years time and see how we're doing.
No, but I think you're right. It will be self-interest that will ultimately make the change. You're right. It will be self-interest that will ultimately make the world more plant-based. And one could get depressed about that, or one could go, thank goodness that there is this reason that's sort of flying down the motorway towards humanity, and that those of us, you're already vegetarian, like, those of us who already aren't eating meat will, everybody will, or most people will start to join us. And if it's out of self-interest, Well, why would it not be? When all human history shows that that's what so many humans act upon anyway. I just think that, yeah, I would say, to address the other side, I would say any devotee who was offered the chance, 2 glasses of milk, and one was a ahimsa and one was from a factory farm mainstream dairy thing, everyone would choose an ahimsa. And from the other side round, I would just invite any vegans who might be watching this who aren't part of Krishna consciousness, if any of them ever want to come to Bhakti Vedanta Manor with me and see how the cows are treated there, and see, if I was a cow, that would be where I'd want to live. And I've been to lots of beautiful animal sanctuaries which also look after them wonderfully. But if I was a cow and I would rather be at the manor even than at the best animal sanctuaries I've been to. And the way that they're treated there is, I wish people could see that, and then they wouldn't start shouting at devotees who've only wanted to bring them along some prasadam on their march.
Yeah. Before we move on to the final question, can I just ask you one thing that I was thinking about the other day, and I don't really know the answer to? What is the difference between a vegan diet and a plant-based diet?
Very good question. It's a very important question. Veganism is avoiding exploitation of animals in all of your life. So somebody who's on a plant-based diet, for instance, could go fox hunting. A vegan couldn't go fox hunting. They eat the same thing, but a vegan will not go to a circus where there's animals. A vegan will not go fox hunting. A vegan will not buy, if they can avoid it, any product that's been tested on an animal. A plant-based person will merely just not eat meat, not eat eggs, and not eat dairy or honey. So the diet is the same. It's the lifestyle that's different.
But the choices might be the same. It's an interesting one, because if you're inspired to follow a plant-based diet because you don't want cruelty to animals or support it, surely, this is my personal view, you will want to support that in all aspects of your life, not just what you eat.
Yeah, I think my example, was theoretical. I think it's unlikely many plant-based diet people go tally-ho and tear foxes to pieces at the weekend, but they would be free to. Some of them might have done it for health. Bill Clinton, for instance, went plant-based because his doctor ordered him to. Some people might go plant-based for the environment, and they might not actually care about suffering of animals. They're doing it because they want their grandchildren to have a planet to live on. It's all sort of different reasons. I've even met full-on vegan animal rights hardcore protesters who don't like animals. I love animals. Like, God, we can't walk down the road if there's a dog.
Who don't like
I never
animals.
I never even ask the owner permission now before I'm just down on my knees giving the dog a big cuddle, sort of thing. So I love animals. That's where I act from. But there are some people who've devoted their life to campaigning for animal rights, and they don't like animals. They think dogs are smelly, cats are aloof, and they think pigs and cows, they're not into them. It's very interesting, the different ways that people come to it.
Okay, I realize we've been chatting for well over an hour, but I've got one final question for you. You're an avid runner. You've talked about running already. You've talked about running away from school, run by the School of Economic Science. Tell us a bit about that, your kind of passion for running, and you're also part of the Hare Krishna Runners Club, I believe. Tell us a bit about that, and how are you involved?
Well, I guess at the beginning, I loved running because literally what you said, like, it was the one part of school where I felt free. And I found that if I ran really fast, I could get back home in time for a quartet of Aussie soap operas, Sons and Daughters, A Country Practice, Neighbours, and Home and Away. And I had to run really fast to be home in time for that. And so I guess that's what got me going. As an adult, what I love running is I love what it does for my mind. It is good for your body. It does make you healthier. It does help you shift calories as you get older and stuff. But what I like is the glow it gives me, the runner's high, the runner's glow. The Hare Krishna Runners Club, it's something that I think will probably become bigger, but it's already a joyful thing. It's mostly my engagement with it is in the Hare Krishna Runners Club WhatsApp group. But what's interesting is I went to the Shivananda Yoga Center many times in Putney. It's a lovely place. And one of the Karma yogis there said, "Oh, I saw you running the other day. Oh, that's very rajasic to run." And of course, in many ways, she was right. it can also, believe it or not, be tamasic in that it's possible to run in a really slovenly, lazy, ignorant way, but it is kind of rajasic. But for me, what the Hare Krishna Running Club is about is trying to share with each other ways to make the running experience as sattvic as possible, as divine as possible. And so people have talked about, chanting as they run. It can be difficult to speak out loud while you're running because you're out of breath, but some of them have talked about that. Some listen to long kirtans as they run. A few of them went to one RT, I think 7 a.m. RT, Greetings of the Deity in Soho, and then ran to the manor in time for 12. Actually, that sounds a lot longer than it would take. Maybe it was the 12:30 to the 4 p.m. But they did one somewhere, then they ran to the next temple and did the next one there. We've got Hare Krishna Runners Club t-shirts. I'm sure if you go, running t-shirts, which are great, and it's a great way.
I've seen them.
I've had people come up to me at Parkrun and say, "Oh, can you tell me about this?" So then you get to not do book distribution, but do some preaching of spreading Krishna's message, because someone's actually come up to you and asked. They always think it's a Buddhist thing. I don't know if you found that. Everyone always says, "Oh, it's a Buddhist thing, isn't it?" And you go, "No, it's not." And I go, "Are you sure?" I go, "I think I'd know by now. I think I've noticed by now." But I think it's this thing of trying to make running as sattvic as possible, trying to make everything about it as divine. And I do the Windsor Half Marathon every September. And last September when I always have headphones in when I run because I need to listen to something. And I started listening to the wonderful Radhika Das. There's a long kirtan of his that I've got on my phone that I love listening to. And at the end, I just thought, at the end of that kirtan, I'd only done like 3 or 4 of the miles. I just thought, I'll listen to it. Anyway, long story short was I ran the whole way just listening to the same kirtan. And when someone asked me the next day, they said, "What was the run like?" I said, "I don't feel like I ran anywhere. I felt like it started and it finished like that." Whereas normally I'm at 11 miles. I'm like, "Oh, why did I enter this run? I'm hating this." But I just whizzed around listening to the Maha Mantra over and over again. And Radhika Das is like one of my favorite, or probably my favorite kirtaneer. And that was very nice. And yeah, I hope that in time the Hare Krishna Runners Club will become bigger. And I'm saying that to myself. It's up to me as well as anyone else to make it bigger. But I'd encourage people to run, and I'd encourage people to join our club.
Well, in preparation for this podcast, I did look up the Hare Krishna Runners and or the Hare Krishna Running Club, and I do recognize some of the faces in the group. So I do know some of the devotees involved with that. And
it says on the back of the t-shirt, sorry, just to say that Gauranga. That's what's written on the back of the t-shirt. And if you order one, there's even a space where you can type in on the website your spiritual name and have that included on your t-shirt if you want.
That is so good. There's a Hare Krishna Runners Club website.
I believe so, yes.
Wow,
yes.
I'll have to look it up. I used to do quite a few half marathons a long time ago, but I don't anymore. So I have done running. I've never done a full marathon, but I've done 4 half marathons. But now I just prefer walking. Believe it or not, Chaz, we've been chatting. Well, you and I have been chatting for a long time, but we've been recording this podcast for almost an hour and a half.
Wow.
I know. And it's been really fascinating to hear your story, and what I love about your story is it's very varied. So we've talked about the School of Economic Science. We've talked about veganism. We've talked about the lady in the shop in Datchet. I love that. And we've talked about running and the blissfulness of running. And I've loved that. And I've even think now fully I've understood what veganism is compared to plant-based diet.
Yeah.
So we've really touched on a lot of stuff in the last kind of hour and a half. So Chaz, it's been fantastic to have you as the guest on this week's podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Episode 121. I can't believe it. I was only planning to do 10 like 3 years ago. And now we're at this number. So I'm going to say goodbye to the viewers at home, Chaz, and then you and I can have a brief debrief after. So a big thank you to everyone for tuning into this week's podcast. Do not forget, if you're watching this on YouTube, to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, so you can be kept updated about future podcasts from the Hare Krishna project. And or if you are watching this on Facebook, please do like or follow the Facebook page as well, so you can be kept updated about future podcasts and things that we're doing. We're doing lots of things, as you know, here at the Hare Krishna project. We do events and festivals and book distribution. So until next week, I'll see you all soon. Thank you. Hare Krishna.